Hey guys, I'm the Comics Kid 2099. I know I haven't done a video in the last couple of days. That's because of a combination of things. One, last week when I would have been getting ready to do videos for this week, I had read several graphic novels, but they were graphic novels that I wasn't really ready to review because if I'm reading volume 4 of a series and I haven't yet reviewed volumes 1 through 3, I don't want to just do a review of volume 4. I want to go back and do reviews of the earlier volumes, and that was kind of what was going on with the stuff that I had been reading lately. So I wasn't ready to do a video for Monday or Tuesday, so here I am for Wednesday's video, and I'm going to be doing one for tomorrow, and then we'll just see how it goes for the rest of the week. Also, I'm working all of this week, and so that's going to be cutting into the time that I could be spending doing videos. So in the future, if I'm not doing a whole lot of videos during the week, then that means I'm probably working that week. I know way back when I did an update and I said, hey, I got a job, I said that that the job would not be cutting into my videos because I was only going to be working Saturday. Turns out I was mistaken. I've worked all week several times already, so that's what's going on. As for the topic of this video, I'm doing a review of a book, Hawkworld. This is written and drawn by Timothy Truman, and I am, how should I put this? I like Hawkman. I like the concept of the character. I personally prefer the alien police officer who comes to Earth. I know there's at least some people out there who prefer the reincarnated Egyptian prince aspect of the character from the 1940s. I lean toward the Silver Age aspect. I like the idea of Hawkman. I think he looks cool, and I honestly don't think that he's a terrible character. I know a lot of people kind of like to make fun of him because, oh, all that guy can do is fly. Well, sure, he carries ancient weapons and stuff, but he doesn't have any powers beyond flying, but I don't think that makes him a bad character. I was familiar with this version of Hawkman from around the time when I was, I don't want to say getting introduced to DC, but I was still becoming familiar with a lot of the post-Crisis on Infinite Earths DC universe. And what's very interesting about Hawkman is that for a little while, about 5 years after Crisis on Infinite Earths, Hawkman looked pretty much the same as he always did. And the thing about Hawkman is, in the 1960s, when the DC universe was kind of being rebuilt from the ground up, they reintroduced the Flash, they reintroduced Green Lantern, they reintroduced the Atom, and those new versions of those characters had completely different costumes than the 1940s versions. When they reintroduced Hawkman, he had the same costume as he did in the 1940s. And then in the late 1980s, early 1990s, he once again had the same costume. Well, then this miniseries comes along, and as you can see, he kind of has a different costume here than he had in the previous versions. And basically, this story is year one for Hawkman, in that this is the origin story for Hawkman. What's interesting is this pretty much is a fundamental rebuilding of the character. For the first 5 or so years after Crisis on Infinite Earths, Hawkman was not that different. And then this story comes along, and it pretty radically alters the character. Now, at the core, he's still a police officer from the planet Thanagar, but it kind of changes who he is as a character. It kind of changes his wife quite a bit, too. She's in this, but not a whole lot. And really, it's one of those things, if you like to try and make continuity fit and try and make everything make sense, you might not like this if you are very familiar with all of the other Hawkman stuff from before and after this. Because what happened here, this is a year one story. This is the origin story for Hawkman. And at first you're thinking, oh, okay, this is just like set in the past. But then this story, I'm going to go ahead and spoil this. This whole story, since it's called Hawkworld, is set on the planet Thanagar. The story ends with Katar and Shayera coming to planet Earth, or rather, they're leaving Thanagar, preparing to go to planet Earth. And then you're thinking, oh, okay, and then they went to Earth sometime in the past. Except that in the series that followed this miniseries, they come to Earth and it's the present day. And you're thinking at first this was meant to be a prequel, but then it's like, no, that was set in the present day. And then there's a whole big jumbled ball of yarn about how this doesn't really work with the previous appearances of Hawkman. And at that point, they then tried to figure out a way to make those appearances actually be part of the continuity without contradicting what's going on here. And I'm not really going to talk a lot about that, partly because I don't know a whole lot about that. I just know that there was a jumbled ball of continuity. What about this story? Is this good? Is this worth your time? I'm going to go ahead and say yes. If you want to get into Hawkman, but you don't really know where to start, this is a great standalone story. It does not use any of the past Hawkman stuff. You don't have to be familiar with it. Now, it does use characters who had appeared in the 1960s. For example, the character Bith, Shayera Hall's father, she's in this, and of course Hawkman and Shayera herself are in this. Characters who existed before this story are in this book, but this is basically just like Batman Year One, in that you could read that story without having read anything regarding the character from before, and you would be fine. Same is true here. This is a very good standalone story, so if you want to get into Hawkman, this is a good place to start. The plot is pretty simple. Qatar Hall, it starts off with him as a young rookie in the Thanagarian police force. There's corruption in the ranks. That's pretty easy to tell from the very beginning. And then, I'm not really going to get into it, but stuff happens, and then by the end of the story, he's an entirely different human being. In a way, it's very similar. I know I've compared it to Batman Year One twice now. It's very similar to two TV shows, or rather, a movie and a TV show. Batman Begins and the TV show Arrow. Both of those stories involve a main character who is living in the city. He lives life in a certain way, and then in Batman Begins, he kind of leaves of his own accord, and in Arrow, his life is taken into someone else's hands, and he is exiled on an island for 5 years. Both of those stories involve the character going through drastic changes and then coming back to their city to clean up what's going on there. Kind of sort of the same thing is going on in this story, where Qatar is wrongly accused of a crime. I'm going to go ahead and spoil it just a little bit. And then he is exiled, and then 10 years happens, and then he goes back to the city, and he's kind of trying to fix things. And one thing you may not like about this, at the end of the day, I'm not really sure if you could say that his transformation into Hawkman as we know him, I'm not really sure if it works in the way that a lot of people would want it to work. He goes through a lot of changes in this book, but it's kind of hard to track those changes, I guess is what I'm saying, because at the beginning of the book, he's pretty much a decent human being, and that's kind of the difference between this and Batman Begins and Arrow. In Arrow and in Batman Begins, both of the protagonists in those stories are pretty much spoiled brats. Here, Qatar Hall is pretty much a decent human being. And then, after his exile, he kind of does something that's not really good, and then he kind of spends years trying to atone for that. Ultimately, though, I'm not really sure why he feels like he needs to change his life when he's on the island and then when he comes back to the city. And I feel like his transformation into Hawkman at the end of the day is a little rushed, but I'm assuming that that's kind of addressed in the sequel series that follows up this miniseries, which I haven't read any of that series in a very long time. I know I have some of the back issues somewhere, but I haven't read them in years. So I'm going to say this is probably a 7 out of 10. It's pretty darn good. The art is just phenomenal. Very gritty. In a way, the foreword at the beginning of this book was written in the early 90s. It's by editor Mike Gold, and he said that the artist Truman is a student of Joe Kubert, and his style is very reminiscent of Kubert's. And I would say, yeah, it's sort of a darker version of Joe Kubert's work. It's very good. I really love the artwork. And the story, like I say, this is in a lot of ways, it's a setup for Hawkman's status quo. And so, if you haven't read any of the Hawkman stuff from the 1990s, then this might feel like a pilot episode for a series that never got picked up. As its own, on its own, I think it is pretty good. It stumbles a little bit towards the end, but I think for the most part this works really well. I enjoyed myself a great deal here. I have been kind of hoping that this series would get picked up into a trade paperback for a long time now. I'm sure they did a trade in the early 90s and it was just so hard to find that it might as well not have even existed. I'm a huge fan of the late 1980s, early 1990s stuff from DC Comics, and I'm really glad that some of that stuff is finally getting collected now. You can say what you will about DC Comics and their current output, but what they're doing right now, they are putting some really solid stuff from the past into trade. For example, the late 1980s, early 1990s Green Arrow stuff is being put into trade, and I did a review on that a while back. Really glad that this is getting put into trade. I'm hoping that they will put some more of the Hawkman stuff from the early 1990s in trades. I think Tim Truman was on the series that followed this one for a little while, and then I believe John Ostrander replaced him, and there was another artist who came on board shortly afterwards. But I'm really interested to see if DC will follow this up, or if this is just a one-time thing. But either way, yeah, I would say go ahead and get this. I think it's pretty good. I think you guys will enjoy it. So that's all I have to say about this book. I will see you guys tomorrow with another video, and until then, I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.